My son-in-law, Frank, a man who worships at the altar of order and clean surfaces, made me sleep in the garage. He didn't ask me, he told me. He exiled me from the warmth and light of his house to a cold concrete box filled with the smell of gasoline and forgotten things. He made it clear, with a chilling lack of malice, that my place was among the tools and the garbage. He only started to regret this arrangement when he began to hear my knocking. A soft, patient, relentless knocking that started every night at midnight, not on the front door, but on the door to his own bedroom. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Marion. My name is Marion Shaw. I'm 80 years old, and my hands, though spotted with age, still know the feel of a well-balanced hammer. My late husband, Henry, was a master carpenter, a man who could coax stories out of wood. Our home was filled with the gentle, rhythmic sounds of his work, the whisper of a hand plane, the rasp of a saw, and the steady, comforting tap-tap-tap-tap of his hammer. It was the music of my life. This is the story of how that comforting sound, my memory of it, was twisted into a weapon. It's the story of how a woman, locked in a garage, learned that she didn't need hands to knock on a door that was 30 feet away. This is a story about doors. The ones that are open to you, and the ones that are slammed shut in your face. It is a secret I've kept, a quiet, rhythmic tapping in my own heart. Because how do you explain such a thing without sounding mad? How do you explain that a mother's broken heart can learn to knock in the night? But it happened. And it was a sound he could not ignore. Before I open this door for you, I would be so grateful for your support. Please, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Knowing that you are on the other side, listening, gives me the courage to finally speak of the time I was locked out, and how I found a way back in. To understand how I ended up sleeping next to a lawnmower, you must first understand the man my daughter married. My daughter, my sweet, gentle Susan, has always been a follower. She is a creature of soft heart and a pliable will, a woman who longs for peace above all else. And in Frank, she found not peace, but a kind of rigid, unyielding order that she mistook for strength. Frank is an accountant. Not a bookkeeper, but a high-level corporate accountant, a man who sees the world as a series of spreadsheets. Everything to Frank must balance. Everything must have its proper place, its designated box. He is a man who vacuums in straight, overlapping lines. He is a man who arranges the cans in his pantry with the labels facing out. His home is not a place of comfort. It is a testament to his control. It is a museum of tidiness. When I first met him, I saw the red flags, but I dismissed them as quirks. I saw his obsessive need for order as a sign of a disciplined mind. I saw his condescending attitude towards my own comfortable, slightly cluttered home as a generational difference. I saw his quiet, firm control over my daughter as a form of paternalistic care. I was wrong. It was not discipline. It was a pathology. It was not a generational difference. It was a profound lack of respect. And it was not care. It was ownership. My life, before Frank, was a happy one. My husband, Henry, the carpenter, had passed away several years before, but he had left me with a sturdy, comfortable house that he had filled with his beautiful, handmade furniture. And he had left me with my Susan. Our relationship was the center of my world. We were close, the way only a mother and a single daughter can be. We were confidantes, allies, best friends. When she fell in love with Frank, I was happy for her. He was successful, handsome, and seemed to adore her. But I noticed over time how she began to shrink in his presence. Her easy laughter became quieter. Her spontaneous nature was curbed, replaced by a careful, anxious desire to please him, to not disrupt his perfect order. She was a vibrant, colorful bird, slowly fading to a pale beige gray, to match the walls of his house. The decision for me to sell my house and move in with them was, of course, presented as Frank's idea. A logical, practical, financially sound idea. "Marion," he said to me one Sunday evening, after a dinner where I had accidentally left a small ring of condensation on his polished mahogany table, a sin for which he had silently rebuked me with a pointed glare and the aggressive application of a coaster. We've been looking at your finances, the property taxes on your house, the upkeep, the heating bills. It's a significant drain on your resources. It's simply not a logical use of your assets. Susan sat beside him, nodding silently, her eyes fixed on her plate. The most logical thing, he continued, leaning forward as if explaining a complex tax loophole, would be for you to sell the house, invest the proceeds, and move in with us. We have the space. It would be a consolidation of resources. It makes perfect sense from an accounting perspective. From an accounting perspective, he was talking about my life, my home, my memories, as if it were a quarterly report. I looked at Susan, hoping to see a flicker of protest, of her old, spirited self. I saw nothing but a quiet, fearful compliance. She was already under his control. To fight him would be to fight her too. And I was tired. My own health had been declining, a slow, steady march of arthritis and failing eyesight. The idea of being with my daughter, of having her nearby, was a powerful lure. So, I agreed. I let them sell my house. I let them sell my Henry's beautiful, handmade furniture. I let them reduce my entire life to a series of numbers on a balance sheet. I let myself be consolidated. I moved into their house, a large, modern, and utterly soulless structure in a new suburban development. It was a house of sharp angles, beige walls, and a profound, unnerving silence. My things, the few sentimental objects I had insisted on keeping, were a source of visible annoyance to Frank. My collection of antique porcelain thimbles was clutter. The framed photo of Henry was a little morbid. The Afghan my own mother had knitted was the wrong color palette. I was given the guest room. It was a pleasant enough room, but it was on the second floor, and the stairs were becoming a daily challenge for my arthritic knees. I didn't complain. I was a guest in his kingdom, and I knew my place. I tried to be small, to be quiet, to not disrupt the perfect order. The first move happened after 6 months. Frank announced, one evening, that he was being encouraged to work from home more often, and that he needed a dedicated professional office space. The guest room is the only logical choice, he said, looking not at me, but at Susan. It has the best light, and it's quiet. It's the perfect space for me to be productive. But where will Mom sleep? Susan asked, her voice a small, timid whisper. Frank smiled, a thin, patient smile. I've thought of that. The den downstairs. It's a little smaller, but it's on the main floor, which will be so much easier for her with her knees. We'll move her bed in there. It's a perfect solution. It was not a discussion. It was a declaration. The next day, my things were moved downstairs to the den, a small, dark room off the kitchen that housed a large television, and Frank's collection of violent video games. The room had no closet, and the window looked out onto the neighbors' trash cans. But it was on the main floor. It was a perfect solution. I lived in the den for a year. A year of feeling like I was in the way, a piece of misplaced furniture in the family's entertainment center. A year of listening to the sound of Frank's video game explosions and the endless drone of the television. And then came the final move. The banishment. Frank's brother and his family were coming to visit for a week. They had 2 young children. They'll need a place to sleep, of course, Frank announced at dinner. And the den is the only other room with a bed, so we'll just have to make a temporary adjustment. I looked at him, a cold, sick feeling rising in my chest. There were no other rooms. Don't worry, Marion, he said, with that same chilling, problem-solving tone. I've already worked it out. I spent all weekend cleaning out the garage. There's plenty of space. We'll move your bed and your dresser in there. I'll even put down the old area rug from the dining room. It'll be a bit rustic, but it's only for a week. It's a temporary, practical solution. The garage. He was going to make me sleep in the garage. I looked at Susan. Her face was white. Her fork was frozen halfway to her mouth. I saw a flicker of horror in her eyes, a spark of her old self. She opened her mouth to protest. Frank, no, she whispered. We can't. She can't sleep in the Frank's eyes narrowed. He gave her a look so cold, so filled with a quiet, menacing authority, that the words died in her throat. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He just looked at her, and she fell silent. She lowered her eyes to her plate and did not look up again. And in her silence, I saw the full, horrifying truth of my situation. My daughter was not just a follower, she was a prisoner. She was as trapped in this house of perfect order as I was, and her fear of him was greater than her love for me. My own protest died in my throat. What was the point? The decision had been made. The ledgers had been balanced. I was the untidy, illogical variable, and I was being moved to the final, designated box on the spreadsheet of his life, the garage. The move happened the next day. He did it himself, refusing my help, refusing to let Susan help. He was efficient, impersonal. He dismantled my bed, carried my mattress, my dresser, my small box of things, out into the cold, concrete space. The garage was a tomb. It was filled with the things of a suburban life that had no place in Frank's pristine house. A lawnmower, bags of fertilizer, a snowblower, old paint cans, a set of golf clubs, a stack of bald tires. And now, me. Another piece of unwanted, seasonal equipment. The air smelled of gasoline, dust, and a damp, creeping cold that radiated from the concrete floor. The only light came from a single bare bulb hanging from the rafters, which cast long, distorted shadows. The only window was a small, grimy rectangle in the large, rattling garage door. My new home had no proper walls, only the cold drywall that separated me from the warmth of the house. In that wall was a single, flimsy door that led to the kitchen. Frank had installed a new lock on it. On the kitchen side, he had laid down a small, threadbare rug on the concrete floor. He had placed my bed against one wall, my dresser against another. He had even run an extension cord from the kitchen, at the end of which was a small, pathetic-looking space heater. "There," he said when he was done. He surveyed the scene, not with shame, but with a look of profound satisfaction. The satisfaction of a man who has finally perfectly organized his world. "You'll be perfectly fine in here. It's just for a week." He left, closing the door to the kitchen behind him. I heard the solid, definitive clicking of the new lock. I stood in the center of the cold, silent garage. I looked at my bed, a sad island in a sea of concrete. I looked at the lawnmower, my new roommate. I looked at the locked door, a symbol of my final, total exclusion. The humiliation was a physical thing. It was a pressure in my chest, a sickness in my stomach. I was 80 years old. I had raised a child, buried a husband, run a household, and I was sleeping in a garage. I was less than a guest. I was less than a servant. I was storage. I sat on the edge of my bed, the cold from the concrete seeping through the thin mattress, through my clothes, deep into my bones. I did not cry. My capacity for tears had been exhausted. Instead, a new feeling began to coalesce in the cold, empty space inside me. It was not a hot anger. It was a cold rage. A rage as cold and as hard as the concrete floor beneath my feet. He wanted to treat me like a thing. An object to be stored away in the dark. Fine. But objects have properties. They make noises. A forgotten box can fall from a shelf. An old engine can tick as it cools. And a person filled with a rage as deep and as cold as a winter night, can learn to knock on a door without ever leaving her room. I looked at the locked door to the kitchen, and beyond it, I pictured the layout of the house. The hallway, the stairs, and at the top of the stairs, the master bedroom, his sanctuary, his fortress of order. A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "You have locked me out, Frank," I thought. "But you have no idea what you have just locked in. You think the danger is on the outside of the door. You are about to learn that the real terror is already inside, and it is coming for you. It is coming to knock." The week that Frank's brother and his family were there was a masterclass in humiliation. I was a footnote in my own life, a creature to be kept hidden. My meals were brought to me by my daughter Susan, on a tray, her eyes always downcast, her face a mask of anxious apology. She would deliver the food with the furtive haste of a smuggler, placing it on a small, wobbly card table she'd set up for me between a stack of snow tires and a bag of foul-smelling fertilizer. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she would whisper, her voice a strained thread of sound. "It's just, Frank wants everything to be perfect for them. He's so stressed." Stressed. That was the word she used to excuse his cruelty. That was the blanket she threw over his monstrous behavior. I would hear their laughter through the thin door that separated my cold concrete world from the warmth of the house. I would hear the shrieks of his nieces, the loud, booming voice of his brother, the clink of wine glasses. I would sit in my makeshift home, a discarded lawn chair, and eat my lukewarm dinner, the smell of gasoline and damp concrete, my only dining companions. At night, I would lie on my bed, the cold from the floor seeping into my bones, and I would listen to the sounds of the family I was no longer a part of until the house fell silent. The true test, the moment I knew my exile was not temporary, came the day after they left. The house was quiet again. I waited all day, expecting Susan or Frank to come to the garage to tell me it was time to move my things back into the den. I waited, my heart a small, anxious bird in my chest. The knock on the door finally came in the evening. It was Susan, holding my dinner tray. Her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she had been crying. Aren't I moving back inside?" I asked, my voice a hopeful, pathetic whisper. She couldn't meet my eyes. She stared at the floor, her shoulders slumped. Frank thinks it's better this way, Mom. For now." "Better?" "No," I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. He says the den works so much better as a media room for us," she stammered, the words spilling out in a rush of rehearsed excuses. "And you have more space out here, more privacy. He's going to buy a small television for you and a better heater. He just needs time to figure out a more permanent solution." A permanent solution. The words hung in the cold air, heavy and menacing. I looked at my daughter, at her tear-streaked, defeated face, and I saw the truth. This was not temporary. This was my life now. The garage was my permanent home. Frank had won. He had successfully organized me out of his life, out of his house, into this cold, concrete box. He had finally, perfectly, tidied me away. That night, as I lay in the dark, a new kind of cold settled over me, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of absolute despair. The last, flickering ember of hope inside me died, leaving only a vast black emptiness. The humiliation, the discomfort, the loneliness, it all coalesced into a single sharp point of pain in the center of my chest. I thought about the door, the locked door to the kitchen. It was more than a door. It was a barrier, a statement. It said, "You are not welcome here. You are not one of us. You are outside." And beyond that door, up the stairs, down the hall, was another door. The door to their bedroom, Frank and Susan's sanctuary. The warmest, safest, most private room in the house. I lay in my cold, exposed prison, and I thought about him, warm and safe in his bed, his conscience clear, his victory absolute. The rage that rose in me was not a hot, fiery thing. It was a cold, silent, seismic force. It was the rage of a tectonic plate, a slow, grinding, unstoppable pressure. It was the rage of a mother whose love had been met with contempt. It was the rage of a woman who had been relegated to the status of a thing. I closed my eyes. I focused on that bedroom door. I pictured it in my mind, the smooth white painted wood, the polished brass handle. I pictured him on the other side of it, sleeping peacefully. And with every ounce of my being, with the full concentrated power of my broken heart, I wished I could knock on it. I wished I could wake him up. I wished I could make him listen. I poured all my pain, all my humiliation, all my silent, screaming rage into that single, desperate, impossible desire. To be heard, to be acknowledged, to knock. And then I fell into a deep, exhausted, dreamless sleep. The haunting began at midnight. In the master bedroom, Frank was asleep. He was a man who slept the deep, untroubled sleep of the righteous, of the man who knows his world is in perfect order. Susan lay beside him, her own sleep a fitful, shallow thing, haunted by a guilt she was too afraid to confront. At precisely 12:00 a.m., a sound entered the quiet room. Knock. 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 Good end. It was a soft sound. A gentle, hesitant tapping. It seemed to come from the bedroom door. Frank's eyes fluttered open. He lay still, listening. The house was silent. He must have been dreaming. He rolled over, pulling the covers tighter. Knock. Dada. Knock. 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 One. Goodbye. There it was again. Clearer, this time. Unmistakable. Someone was knocking on their bedroom door. He sat up, a flicker of annoyance on his face. Susan, he whispered harshly. Did you hear that? Susan mumbled in her sleep, turning away from him. Frank sighed, a put-upon sound. He swung his legs out of bed. He was probably one of the kids from next door, playing a prank. He stomped over to the door and pulled it open, ready to deliver a stern lecture. The hallway was dark and empty. He flicked on the hall light. The long beige corridor was silent and still. He walked down the hall, checking the doors to the other rooms. He went downstairs, checking the front door, the back door. They were all locked, the security system engaged. The house was a fortress. He went back to bed, his mind churning. It was the house, he told himself. Old houses make noises. The pipes, the wood settling. It was a rational explanation. It was the only possible explanation. He lay in the dark, listening. But the sound did not come again. The next night, at precisely 12:00 a.m., it returned. Knock. 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 Ring. The same soft, hesitant, patient rhythm. Frank was awake this time, his ears straining in the darkness. He sat up in bed, his heart beginning to pound with a mixture of anger and a new, unfamiliar feeling, unease. I'm going to kill those kids, he muttered. He got out of bed, but this time he moved silently. He crept to the door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. He waited, listening. The house was silent. He took a deep breath and flung the door open. Empty. The hallway was empty. He stood there for a long time, the cold air from the hallway raising goosebumps on his arms. This wasn't a prank. A prankster would have run. A prankster would have giggled. This was just silence. An impossible sound, followed by an impossible silence. He began to question Susan. Did you hear anything last night? He'd ask her over breakfast, his eyes sharp, searching. No, honey, she'd say, her eyes on her toast. I was fast asleep. Are you sure? He'd press. You're not playing some kind of joke on me, are you? A joke? Frank, why would I do that? She'd ask, a look of genuine, wounded confusion on her face. He started to look at me with suspicion. The day after the second knocking, he came out to the garage. He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his eyes narrowed. Marion, he said, his voice a low growl. Were you up and about last night, around midnight? I looked up at him from my chair, my face a mask of placid confusion. I shook my head slowly. No, Frank, I whispered, my voice frail. I was sleeping. He stared at me, searching for a sign of deception. He saw only a tired, weak old woman. The idea of me climbing the stairs, navigating the dark house, knocking on his door, and then retreating to the garage without making a sound was, of course, absurd. It was impossible. He left, more confused and more angry than before. The knocking continued. Every night. At midnight. Like clockwork. Knock. Dot. Knock. Wanderdalji. Knock. Ite. I. It became the soundtrack to his nights. It was a patient, relentless persecution. It began to infect his sleep, his dreams. He became exhausted, his eyes shadowed, his temper frayed. The perfect orderly world he had built for himself was being disrupted by a single, inexplicable, gentle sound. He began to wage war on the sound. He tried to ignore it, burying his head under the pillows. But the sound seemed to seep through, a quiet, persistent rhythm in his skull. He tried to catch it. He would sit up in bed, his muscles tense, waiting for midnight. The moment the knocking began, he would leap out of bed and fling the door open, his heart pounding with a hunter's adrenaline. But he was always too late. The hallway was always empty. The ghost was always gone. He started to talk to it. He would stand in the empty hallway in the middle of the night, a lonely, furious man in his pajamas, and he would shout at the empty air. "Who are you? What do you want? Show yourself." His only answer was silence. His relationship with Susan began to deteriorate. His obsession with the knocking consumed him. He accused her of hiding something, of being in on the prank. His frustration and lack of sleep made him cruel, his words sharp and cutting. The house, once a silent museum of their success, was now filled with the ugly sounds of their arguments. Susan, for her part, thought he was losing his mind. She couldn't hear the knocking. She would sleep through it, or if she did wake up, she would see him stalking the hallways, his face a mask of paranoid fury, and she would shrink away from him, her fear of him growing with each passing night. The knocking itself began to change, to evolve. It was becoming more personal. One night, it was not a knock with a knuckle. It was a light, scratching sound, like a fingernail being dragged slowly down the wood of the door. Another night, it was a soft, wet, thudding sound, like a body slumping against the door. Frank's paranoia reached a fever pitch. He was a man besieged. He installed a new, heavy-duty lock on their bedroom door, with a deadbolt. That night, at midnight, the knocking came not on the door, but on the wall beside the door. Knock, night, knock, knock. A soft, persistent tapping from within the very structure of the house. He was being driven mad. The logical, rational world he had built for himself was being dismantled, night by night, by a sound he could not explain, a presence he could not see. The turning point, the moment his fear finally overwhelmed his skepticism, was the night Susan finally heard it. He had been particularly cruel to her that evening, his exhaustion and paranoia making him vicious. He had accused her of being stupid, of being useless, of being a lazy, unsupportive wife. She had fled to their bedroom in tears, and for the first time in a long time, she had locked the door against him. He had spent the evening on the sofa, drinking whiskey, a storm of self-pity and rage brewing inside him. He came to bed late, full of a sullen, drunken anger. He lay in the dark, his back to his weeping wife, and he waited. At midnight, it came. Knock, darat. Knock. Knock. Inna. It was on the door, as usual. But this time, it was different. It was not soft or hesitant. It was a hard, loud, demanding sound. The sound of a fist hitting the door. A sound of anger. A sound of judgment. Frank sat bolt upright in bed, his heart seizing in his chest. And beside him, Susan stopped crying. She had heard it too. What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling in the darkness. "You heard it," he breathed, a strange, wild mixture of terror and vindication in his voice. "You finally heard it. Knock, 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 knock." It came again, louder this time, a series of hard, solid blows that seemed to shake the door in its frame. Susan let out a small, terrified whimper and pulled the covers up to her chin. The sound was real. Her husband was not crazy. Something was outside their door. Something wanted in. Frank, fueled by whiskey and a month of sleepless rage, finally snapped. He leaped out of bed, a wild, primal roar erupting from his chest. He flung the bedroom door open. "Who are you?" he screamed into the empty, silent hallway. "What do you want from me?" He stood there, a pathetic, raging figure, yelling at a ghost only he could create, but that they could now both hear. The knocking stopped. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier, more terrifying than the sound itself. He turned back into the room, his chest heaving, his eyes wild. He looked at his wife, who was staring at him with a new, dawning horror. And then he looked at the floor, his gaze traveling down the hall, down the stairs, towards the thin, locked door that led to the garage. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But in that moment of pure, unadulterated terror, a new and impossible suspicion began to form in his mind. The knocking was not coming from the hallway. It was coming from much, much farther away. It was the sound of a prisoner, tapping on the inside of her cell, demanding to be heard. It was the sound of my heart, beating its slow, patient, relentless rhythm against the door of his soul. And he knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that it would never, ever stop. The night Susan heard the knocking changed the dynamic of the house. The haunting was no longer just Frank's private madness. It was a shared terror. But it affected them in vastly different ways. For Frank, it was an affirmation of an external enemy, a siege he had to fight. For Susan, it was the beginning of a terrible, dawning suspicion. A fear that was directed not outward, at a ghost, but inward, at the state of their own home, their own souls. Frank's war against the knocking escalated. He became a man obsessed, a general fighting a phantom army. He installed high-end security cameras with night vision and motion sensors in the upstairs hallway. He would spend hours poring over the footage, watching grainy, silent videos of an empty corridor. The cameras captured nothing. The knocking left no evidence, no heat signature, no spectral image. It existed only in their ears and in their minds. His frustration, with no physical enemy to fight, turned on the only two people in the house, his wife and his mother-in-law. His accusations against Susan became more frequent, more bizarre. He accused her of having a secret accomplice, of using a hidden device to create the sounds. Their arguments became the new soundtrack of the house, louder and more terrible than the midnight knocking. And his treatment of me, in my cold garage, took on a new, fearful quality. He stopped seeing me as just a piece of unwanted clutter. He now saw me as a potential suspect, a malevolent presence. He would come to the garage, and he would interrogate me, his eyes burning with a paranoid fire. "Where were you last night, Marion?" he'd demand. "Did you leave this garage? Did you come into the house?" "No, Frank," I would say, my voice a frail whisper. "The door is locked. I was here, sleeping." My weakness, my physical impossibility to be the source of his torment, only made him angrier. He couldn't solve the puzzle, and it was driving him insane. He started to lock the garage from the outside as well, turning my exile into a true imprisonment, but the knocking on his bedroom door continued, unabated. Susan, meanwhile, was on her own journey of discovery. The shared terror of the knocking had broken through her wall of fearful compliance. She started to watch her husband, not with the eyes of a loving wife, but with the clear, cold eyes of a stranger. She saw his paranoia, his cruelty, his obsession, and she started to connect the dots. The knocking had begun shortly after her mother had been moved into the garage. It was a quiet, sad, pleading sound at first. And as her husband's cruelty had grown, the knocking had grown louder, angrier, more demanding. She didn't understand how, but she began to feel, with a deep, intuitive certainty, that the sound was connected to her mother's pain. She started to rebel, in small, quiet ways. She started spending more time with me in the garage. She would bring me an extra blanket, a hot cup of tea. She would sit with me, in the cold, and she would talk. She would tell me about Frank's strange behavior, about the knocking, about her own growing fear. I would listen, and I would offer no explanation. I would just pat her hand and offer what little comfort I could. I was watching my daughter slowly, painfully, wake up from the long, terrible slumber of her marriage. The final, shattering climax came on a night when a storm was raging outside, the wind howling, the rain lashing against the house. It was a night of great natural violence, a fitting backdrop for the human violence that was to come. Frank had reached the end of his rope. He had been drinking heavily all evening, his paranoia stoked by the sounds of the storm. He had convinced himself that tonight, he would finally confront the source of the knocking. He sat on the floor of the upstairs hallway, his back against the wall opposite his bedroom door, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a heavy iron fireplace poker in the other. He was waiting for midnight. Susan pleaded with him. "Frank, come to bed. You're scaring me." "Good," he snarled. "You should be scared. We all should be. There is something in this house, and I'm going to end it tonight." Ding. At precisely midnight, above the roar of the wind and the rain, it came. Knock. 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 It was on the bedroom door, as always. Loud. Clear. Demanding. Frank leaped to his feet, the poker held high, a wild, cornered look in his eyes. He did not open the door. He began to attack it. "Get out of my house!" he roared, and he brought the heavy poker down on the door with all his strength. The sound of the blow was a deafening crack, splintering the wood. "Leave us alone!" He struck the door again, and again, a man locked in a mortal battle with an invisible enemy. Susan screamed, a sound of pure terror. I, in my garage, heard the commotion. I heard his screaming. I heard the splintering of wood, and my heart, which had been so cold and hard for so long, felt a pang of something I did not expect. Fear. Not for myself, but for my daughter. This had gone too far. The ghost I had unleashed was now threatening to destroy everything. I knew I had to stop it. I focused my will, the same will that had sent the knocking out into the world. But this time, I did not focus on the door. I focused on the man. I focused on Frank. And I did not send a knock. I sent a single, clear thought, a message projected directly into his unraveling mind. Kay is not the one you should be afraid of. Is Emily? Frank froze, the poker held high for another blow. He looked around wildly. Who said that? He whispered. And then, every single door in the upstairs hallway, the bathroom door, the linen closet door, the door to the spare bedroom, slammed shut at the exact same instant, with a single deafening G-boom that shook the entire house. The silence that followed was absolute. Frank dropped the poker. It clattered to the floor. The fight went out of him, replaced by a final, complete, and utter terror. He'd been fighting a single ghost, and now he knew the house was full of them. He sank to the floor, a whimpering, broken man. Susan, her face white with a new terrible resolve, walked past him. She came down the stairs, her movements calm and deliberate. She came into the kitchen and she unlocked the door to the garage. She opened the door. She looked at me, sitting on my bed in the cold, dim light. Our eyes met, and in her gaze, I saw not fear, but a deep, profound, and heartbreaking understanding. "Come on, Mom," she said quietly. "Let's go. It's over." She helped me to my feet, and together we walked out of the garage, out of the cold, and back into the warmth of the house, leaving my son-in-law to the mercy of the ghosts he had created. The house was sold within a month. Frank was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, suffering from what the doctors called an acute psychotic breakdown. He could not live in a world that did not make sense, a world where doors knocked by themselves. Susan and I moved into a small, quiet apartment together. The healing process was slow, for both of us. She had to heal from years of her husband's controlling, abusive behavior. And I had to heal from the wounds of her betrayal, her silence. We talked. For the first time in years, we truly talked. She told me about her fear, about her weakness, about the shame that had kept her silent. And I told her, not everything. I did not tell her that the knocking was me. Some truths are too heavy for a daughter to bear. I let her believe it was the spirit at the house, the ghost of her father, rising up to protect me. Perhaps in a way, it was. Our relationship is not the same as it was in the happy, sunlit days before Frank. A scar remains. But it is a real relationship now, built on a foundation of hard-won truth. The lesson I learned in that cold garage is a simple one. Every human being has a right to be heard. We have a right to knock on the door of our own family and be let in. When you lock someone out, when you treat them as less than human, you do not erase them. You transform them. You turn their pain into a force. You turn their silence into a sound. And that sound, a simple, persistent knocking, can be enough to bring the proudest, most orderly house crashing down. Thank you for letting me knock on your door today and for letting me in. It means more than you will ever know. Please, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell to join our community. In the comments below, I want you to share a story about a time when you refused to be silenced. Let's fill this space with our powerful, insistent voices. Love you all. This is Grandma Marion, and I'll see you in the next story.